Russian President Vladimir Putin goes live to millions of people worldwide on February 24, 2022, at 5:30 a.m. local, declaring a special military operation to denazify Ukraine. 20 Mi-8s are already infiltrating Ukrainian airspace as Putin declares the start of his assault. Over 100 of Russia's most elite air assault troops, the cream of the Russian military, are being transported by transport helicopters. When they reach their target, a flight of Ka-52 attack helicopters accompany them and provide escort protection and fire support. The journey is 250 kilometers from their starting points in Belarus, and helicopters have been in the air for half an hour. By the time word of the invasion is aired, the entire formation launched a massive missile assault on Ukraine before the invasion. The way Ukrainians retaliated and responded to the invasion is appreciable. They have stood like a strong wall against Russian aggression and forced them to retreat. The Russians are taken aback by Ukraine's success. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told reporters that Ukrainian forces had liberated more than 2,300 square miles of Ukraine from Russian control. The president claimed that many invaders had flowed across the border into Russia and that Ukrainian troops were pressing on Russian forces northeast of Kharkiv. Certainly, since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we've seen the Ukrainians demonstrate a remarkable adaptability and ability to use their warfighting capabilities to great effect, writers said during a Pentagon news conference. So, it's not surprising that they have pushed as quickly as they have. The Ukrainian military used any military chance on the battlefield of battle. The general claimed that the Kharkiv counteroffensive was evidence of that. Western weapons and supplies aided the counteroffensive's success. At a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Ramstein Air Base, Germany, Secretary of Defense Lloyd J. Austin III and counterparts from nearly 50 other countries vowed to maintain the supply chain and increase aid that can be used to strengthen Ukrainian defenses in the medium and long term. According to the general, Ukrainian forces are making excellent use of their equipment throughout the counteroffensive and have altered the battlefield's dynamics. As the fight continues, the Ukrainian military has also learned new things. The Ukrainian military embraced combined arms as a means of warfare and adopted NATO fighting tactics, combining these modern strategies with older military hardware from the Soviet era. The Ukrainian military defeated the Russians in battle. In addition to learning Western technologies like the M777 howitzers, HIMARS, drones, and others, Ukrainian service members could use these systems alongside older ones and incorporate them into their war strategies. What happens if Russia loses the war? Some of our European friends will need to do more to help the effort in Ukraine if we want to maintain the ability to challenge Russia and China simultaneously. The defeat of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine would be highly beneficial. It would dissuade Chinese expansionism and eventual Russian aggression in Europe by proving Western resolve and lethality. However, it is crucial that Washington give Ukraine the assistance it needs in a way that fully accounts for the American people, does not incur significant financial liabilities for the American taxpayer, and does not deplete resources needed to fight the People's Republic of China. As a result, the U.S. will be able to carry most of the burden of discouraging China in the Pacific. Additionally, the Ukrainians are currently leading the war. Their soldiers are moving forward on two fronts, either capturing or posing a threat to the area that Putin has declared to be Russian territory forever. Reports of disorder and even rage within the Russian army nearly every day surface. U.S. and NATO continue to exchange armaments. In terms of warfare, the Russians' theater-level plan has failed due to their exaggerated estimates of the force necessary, the lack of senior enlisted commanders with authority to make choices at the front, and their vast underestimation of the Ukrainian and NATO replies. In this regard, we can take our inspiration from University of St Andrews researcher Philip O'Brien, who has more in-depth knowledge of World War II logistics than anybody I know. The Russians have likewise failed on the logistical front. He thinks that Russia won't be able to sufficiently train its new unprepared and possibly unwilling troops or outfit them in time to change the tide on the battlefield. A government that commands respect, a strong affiliation with the cause, and the sense that one must defeat the enemy to preserve oneself and one's allies help an army reach that state of readiness. It is obvious that the Ukrainians are vastly superior on all of these fronts. Consequently, there is a growing chance that the Ukrainian army will defeat the renowned Russian army. What might failure look like? What constitutes a win for Ukraine? Or, from the other perspective, how would Russia react to losing? Only Putin can answer that to some extent, considering how many times his war aims and narrative have evolved since the first troops arrived. But if his forces were pushed back to the small regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, Where Russian proxies were in control before Putin's invasion on February 24, he would view it as a defeat. However, given the current course of events, failure may appear worse from the Russian perspective. Ukraine may go ahead and drive Russian forces from the areas Putin had before the war. As Grit has reported, some of Putin's most ardent pro-war propagandists have started criticizing Russia's performance and urged that more areas be conquered, no matter the price to Russian forces. It would be difficult for them to portray these results as mission achieved. Many prominent and outspoken Russians would view any situation mentioned earlier as an unforgivable disgrace. Numerous observers argue that Russia still possesses a sizable force that it has not yet committed to using, one that dwarfs Ukraine's capacity. However, where is it? Putin called the conflict in Kyiv existential, but is he reserving this card for a broader conflict with NATO? Another possibility is that when the bad news keeps coming in, senior military and security officials in Russia could act as a sort of unofficial Politburo and let Putin know that they can no longer support him, and that it is time for him to go back to his dacha with some dignity still intact. That can also turn out to be wishful thinking. Other consequences are possible, such as the collapse of public order. Still, it is difficult to imagine that happening in Russia, given its highly centralized structure and security agencies demonstrated willingness to brutally suppress any protest. Finally, some Russians, unable to envision what would happen if they lost, drew yet another scenario that could be characterized as the Russian leaders slowly dawning. More Russians would emigrate, a frail Putin would cling to power, and Russia would exist as a defeated nation for a while. Putin's monumental miscalculation. This is the result of Putin's massive error of judgment for a nation that, despite its flaws, has many proud traditions and talented inhabitants, and which, during his early years in office, had acquired a position of significant importance and respect around the world. Since World War I, Russia has seen at least three crucial, if not existential, turning points: the 1917 revolution, the German invasion that started in 1941, and the years that followed the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. These were significant problems with vastly varied solutions, and in some ways, Russia is still dealing with the fallout from all of those changes. With his invasion of Ukraine and the foolishness of his subsequent actions, Putin is leading the nation into another turning point. The consequence is as ambiguous and unstable as those prior cataclysmic occurrences. It is no longer impossible that Putin will lose power in the event of a disastrous outcome in Ukraine, such as the collapse of the Russian military or its expulsion from the nation. However, if Russia loses in Ukraine, the Russian elite and all the ultranationalists who control the media would have to imagine a scenario in which Russia and many of its leaders continue to be subject to Western sanctions, have a meek and globally isolated leader at the helm, and have little influence on the global stage. Will they agree to that? What is your opinion about it? Please share your feedback in the comment box. Your views are highly appreciated.